when we walk through Jerusalem, we tell Dan we want to get to a place in 10 minutes. It takes us 2 hours because they come out of woodwork. Oh, Dan, I've got to ask you, can you explain what we found? And everybody comes to him, and he's my friend, so I hope that doesn't vitiate my point. I learned so much from him, and I don't want to take his time. But just do what you want to do, and what we will do is take the video and see if we can get an article out of it, or a check. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Bahat.
So Shalom, the truth is that I didn't prepare any lecture, that's the truth.
Thank God!
But yesterday, I'll take the watch so I check.
Is this mine?
The story is that actually only a few days ago, John showed me the program of the seminar, and I thought that something was missing. And what was missing was what Isaiah is doing in Jerusalem. After all, that's the whole point. And I thought that I will say some remarks on that. But I thought also that this is a good opportunity to say some words about something more general, which you'll see immediately how it is connected to the story. And the story is the name of Jerusalem. What is the name of Jerusalem? First time when we hear about Jerusalem is Melchizedek and Abraham, when Melchizedek is the king of Salem, Shalem in Hebrew. And actually, when you write Jerusalem in Hebrew, it is always Yerushalem. Hence, in all the foreign languages, it is Jerusalem, and not Jerusalem, as in Hebrew it is Yerushalayim. And I think that this is very important to explain Isaiah in connection with that. Jerusalem is not the city of peace. Jerusalem is the last city in the world where you can speak about peace. Yerushalem comes from the Hebrew word, root of the verb Yeru, which comes from Yud Resh Hey, for those who know, Lirot, which in Hebrew means to found. To found, for example, when you lay the foundation stone, you say Lirot et Even Apina, for those who know Hebrew. It is the same root. Moreover, another word which comes from the same root is Moriah, Mount Moriah, which is also the source of sanctity of Jerusalem. So what we see here is Jerusalem, God Salem has founded it. Salem is a god of night in the Canaanite pantheon. He's a twin brother to God Shachar, who is the god of day. So Shachar and Shalem are twins, and they are making the whole complete thing. And as you know in Hebrew, complete is Shalem. You see, he is God of the night, this one is the God of day, and since then, in Hebrew, the word Shachar means dawn, early morning, dawn. So I know that Jerusalem's real name is Jerusalem, Yerushalem, and I opened yesterday the concordance to check if there is anywhere where Jerusalem is written with Yud, Yerushalayim. No, I did not find, but always the vowels, the points in Hebrew, are all writing Yerushalayim, always. The vowels, but not the letters. You see, very interesting. So we know that the real name of Jerusalem is Yerushalem, and not Yerushalayim. How is it connected to Prophet Isaiah? It is very much so much, because Prophet Isaiah was in Jerusalem, he was a testimony, and actually he was witnessing the greatest change in Jerusalem, which you can find easily in Isaiah 22:10. And there, if you remember, he's calling King Hezekiah. You didn't understand that God is the whip in the hand of the Lord to punish all the stubborn nations. What did you do? You broke the houses, you passed the wall, and you brought water into Jerusalem, which means instead of repenting and instead of atoning, what did you do? You did physical things such as building a wall, destroying houses, bringing water, and all kinds of things. And here starts the story. The story starts with that Isaiah, what is the great event which Isaiah witnessed? We have to remember that in 722 BC, I say BC and always have the permanent joke which I have for somebody else, it's not mine. Since I'm teaching usually in non-Jewish institutions, I always say BC and AD. And people tell me, look, you are a Jewish person, you should say BC and BCE. So I say what I heard from a Jewish professor in America said, no problem, BC AD is fantastic. BC is before Christianity, it's fact of life, and AD is after that. So at any rate, so in 772 BC, Israel was conquered finally. People went to exile, but many people remembered that Jerusalem is the capital of the nation. And many immigrated to Jerusalem. And we really see from archaeological excavations that the city expanded up to the western hill of Jerusalem. The western hill of Jerusalem includes today Jewish Quarter, Armenian Quarter, and Mount Zion. And actually, by that, it was really a phenomenon which was slowly growing. It was not suddenly, but it started 722. And as you know, we know that many of the people came. For example, one of the people against which Isaiah is speaking is Shevna Asher al Habayit. Shevna, which you write in Hebrew, Shin Bet, Nun Aleph. And as you know, in Israel, names, what in Israel will be Yahu or Yeho, yes, the name, the divine name, in Israel was Aleph. So Shevna definitely came from Israel. And we know it because we've got names from Israel, from the famous Ostraka from Samaria. At any rate, the interesting thing is that many came to live in Jerusalem. The city slowly expanded, and it expanded, first of all, going down from the city of David, and tomorrow we have got a tour, so I'll be referring to those kind of places. There are things going down to the valley, and then up to the hill, and then settling everywhere there. Then Hezekiah understands that the Assyrians are coming. He decides to defend the city. And so what does he do? He builds a city wall. This is the second wall of the first temple period. Soon you'll see why I stress it, yes? Because the first wall was the wall which surrounded the city of David, later expanded with Solomon to Temple Mount. And now we have another one. This is the city wall which was built by King Hezekiah. Well, what happens then? Hezekiah took the best geographical or topographical defensive line. And since the houses of the Israelites who immigrated to Jerusalem was not taking into account the possibility that in the future there might be a wall, they settled everywhere. Hezekiah decided to destroy the houses which are on the course, which is the defensive line, and build a city wall. And indeed, we see actually that houses were destroyed, and tomorrow I'll show you one example. When everybody goes to the Jewish Quarter, you can see the Hezekiah wall, and you can see that it actually severs houses which were on the spot because it chose this one as the best defensive line. About the water, I don't have to speak. Everybody knows how it was brought. But the situation then is that Jerusalem becomes a double city. One part of the city is city of David and Mount Moriah, and the second part is the western hill. The western hill, which in the second temple period will be called Zion, or the upper market, as Josephus Flavius calls it. Jerusalem becomes doubled. And as it becomes a double city, by the way, the German geographers even termed it as a Doppelstadt, a double city. Yes? Then Jerusalem starts to be called not Jerusalem, but Yerushalayim, because you know that everything in Hebrew, which is Ayin, is actually double. Einaim, Oznaim, Raglaim, Yadayim. Yes? And Yerushalayim, two Jerusalems. That is what this is. And Isaiah was the prophet who saw this change, the transformation from, remember, I want to tell you that in the Second Temple period and later, Jerusalem was already called Yerushalayim. So don't be surprised that the dots, yes, the vowels, which were added much, much later, they already knew the name Jerusalem, and they did not take in account that actually the name, it is Jerusalem, and then later it will be Yerushalayim. My disappointment is that as much as I looked, and I told you I did not prepare this lecture because, you know, I learned about the need to say those kind of things actually yesterday or the day before yesterday only. At any rate, what I tried to check, and it's superficially, I didn't find, I wanted to see at least one place in the Bible where Jerusalem will be written with a Yud, that it will be really Yerushalayim. I didn't find, but I hope, scrutinizing better, I'll find. I'm quite sure that there must be the late prophets or somewhere. We must find maybe in the Apocrypha, we'll find somewhere. We'll find somewhere, I'm quite sure. So at any rate, this is what I wanted to stress, that actually Isaiah was the one really to see the change in Jerusalem. Not only that, when I checked in the concordance, I found out that out of the 600 times, or almost 700 times that Jerusalem is mentioned in the Old Testament, Isaiah takes a great, great share. He was a Jerusalemite, he saw Jerusalem, he knew Jerusalem, he loved Jerusalem, and therefore it is mentioned so many times in his writing. So that's actually what I wanted to tell, just a note. Thank you. Yes, of course.
We can address the questions, and Lamar had one he wanted to raise first.
Yes, please.
When was the western part of the city developed from a chronological point of view? If the city of David was the original settlement, and then I wanted to ask you one other follow-up question, if I may. Do you go along with Elliot Nazar and the fact that the new major building that she has been working on between the city of David and the Western Hill is in fact the Palace of David, or do you disagree with that?
So the question is, the western part of Jerusalem was developed not before the end of the 8th century BC. That's exactly what Isaiah is telling us. We see it from Isaiah. Yes, that's number one. Number two, about the... another thing which is important. You remember I told you that this will be the second wall of the first temple period, right? Already from the 20s of the 20th century, there was a dispute, because when you read the great prophets like Jeremiah, Isaiah, and the others, Jerusalem is a big city. Jerusalem is a big city, a lot of corruptions, oppressing the widow, you remember, blackmailing the orphan, you know, all the things which we know so well. The thing is that, especially the German scholars, they said Jerusalem, as is described by the late prophets, cannot be Jerusalem which is limited only to the hill of the city of David and the Temple Mount. It cannot be. Jerusalem must have been bigger. So they were developed in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s even, two schools. One of them was the Israeli-American school, which spoke about Jerusalem as a small city. And I remember our late professor, who was our teacher of Jerusalem, Professor Aviona, he was the editor of a book which was published in 1956. Remember, then Jerusalem was divided. Remember, Jordan and Israel. A book which is called The Book of Jerusalem, which was a beautiful, it is one of the most beautiful, aesthetically, one of the most beautiful books on Jerusalem published in Hebrew. And he started to show, and he was convincing all of us, that actually Jerusalem was limited only to the hill of the city of David and the Temple Mount. And one of the reasons he gave us that all the geographical names which we have in the Old Testament and which we are able to identify are all connected to the city of David, like Ein Rogel, Gihon, Shiloach, Temple Mount, city of David itself. All the names which we are able to identify are actually there. I want to remind you that all the kings of Judah were buried in the hill of the city of David, and only Hezekiah and later they are buried elsewhere. All the other names where the kings are mentioned as being their burial place, none of them we can identify with certainty. So, as you understand, only the names which we know where they are there. The great change happened when we started to dig the Jewish quarter, and Professor Avigad discovered the great Hezekiah wall, and then we understood that we have to think differently. We have to think differently to see the expansion of Jerusalem. I remember that Avigad himself limited, to begin with, limited the city on the western hill only to the area which he found where he excavated, only to the Jewish quarter only. But reading Josephus Flavius, when he describes Jerusalem, and he speaks about the first wall of the Second Temple period, you see, don't be mixed. Second wall of the First Temple period with the first wall of the Second Temple period. He tells us that the first wall, which is the oldest one, which we know the course of it very well, I'll speak about it tomorrow in the tour, we know the course of it, and this one engulfs the entire western hill, including Mount Zion and including the Armenian quarter. So, what happens is that Josephus Flavius, when he speaks about the first wall, you see, of the Second Temple period, he tells us that it was built by the kings of David and Solomon and the kings who followed, which means he already knew that actually the walls, the first wall of the Second Temple period and the second wall of the First Temple period are actually have got the same line. This was approved by Avigad, who discovered the famous tower, the Israelite tower in the Jewish quarter, to which are abutting the remains of the second wall. We'll see tomorrow also. And thus, today we are going to the point where I can say that as we know well the course of the first wall of the Second Temple period, so from this we can conclude that this is more or less also the Hezekiah wall, which goes all around the Jewish quarter. Today, it seems to us, I myself was deliberating. I remember when I published the first version of my Atlas of Jerusalem, I made Jerusalem smaller, and only later I was convinced that actually it should be larger. Although there are with some reservations, because there are some things which may put, I will say, some restrictions on the possibility of this big city, but this is very minor if we are trying to compare. I remember the Israel Exploring Society had a seminar which was called Biblical, I don't remember, something with Bag, I don't remember the name of it. And there I wrote and asked, is Jerusalem really that big? Then I was not convinced yet, but slowly, all my friends around me who see me as an enemy of the nation, because I thought about a smaller city, but now I think they were right. And we are trying to find all kind of possible remains everywhere. We'll speak about it a lot tomorrow. I'll show you that we are able to think about it. We're able to think about it, and today, more or less, there is a general agreement that Jerusalem was big. The point is that both schools are right. Half of the time, from the time of King David till Hezekiah, which is 10th century to the end of 8th, Jerusalem was small, and from the 8th to the destruction of the temple in 586 BC, it was a larger one. So everybody was right. That's to conclude. The other question about David Palace. One of the mistakes archaeologists are tending to do is when they find something, in order to make it sensational, they immediately give it a tag. And this is very wrong to do. What Eilat Mazar should have done is say, first time in the history of the excavations in the hill of the city of David, we found remains of a public building which was used in the 10th century BC. You see, the time of David. Because if you remember, I remember when it was found, everybody said, David was not a builder, a great builder. It's true. David was not a great builder. definitely no. Unlike Solomon, who was a great builder. At any rate, the interesting thing is that when you read the book of Samuel, when we have the discussion of, the description of the conquest of Jerusalem, it says, and David conquered the citadel of Zion, and he settled there, and he called it Vaishev Sham in Hebrew, and he called it the city of David, which means the building which we should look for is an earlier building called the citadel of Zion, a citadel, and David settled there. And indeed, Einat Mazar, in one of the rooms, she discovered that the room was founded, you know, by archaeology, what you find under the floor is when it was founded, and what you find over the floor is when it was used. That's a principle in archaeology. Of course, I'm not going to teach you a course in archaeology, but that's more or less, grosso modo, that's it. So indeed, the remains under the floor were 11th century, and on the floor, 10th century. If I say on the floor 10th century, it is very interesting. To me, it is a proof to another thing. If it is 10th century, this was the last use. If it was the last use, what do you want to tell me, that it was not used in later periods? No. When Solomon built the civic center of Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, and his palaces and so on, the civic self moved from the hill of the city of David to Mount Moriah. You see, so even this is good. So altogether, hadn't Eilat said it that way, as I describe it now, which I am quite sure that after what I said in the last few sentences, you are convinced. But you see, she didn't do it. She immediately went out. But this is because of a problem. She is sponsored by people who want to find. I remember I started to dig one day in the hill of the city of David, and I found a cistern from the Mamluk period, which is still introduced by the people who guide there as the pit to which Jeremiah was cast. You see? So I knew that I should keep away from the city of David. You see? Yes, please.
Would you comment about the water tunnel, its construction? I know the inscription is in Istanbul, but if that was
This is
maybe
Hezekiah.
expanded in the time of Hezekiah.
Yes.
But what existed before Hezekiah? Did his own expansion of it? Would you just comment on that?
I will tell you what. The story of the spring, the Gihon spring, is changing from one day to the other thanks to the excavations today. Today we see it completely different eyes following the last excavations. First of all, it was developed as a structure. This is another very interesting thing. I'm afraid I'm going to talk it tomorrow, so stop me. At any rate, I'll tell you what. The story is Melchizedek. The story is Abraham. And why do I say that? Because, you know, already Albright, everybody knows who Albright was, already spoke that the patriarchs lived in the MB2B period, which we call, let's say, the Hyksos period. Okay? Is it clear what I'm talking about, I hope? At any rate, the fantastic thing is that the greatest works carried out in the hill of the city of David, as we know today, because remember that great part of it is was not excavated or cannot be excavated because it was destroyed in the Roman period. The greatest works are from the 18th century BC, in what we call second MB2B, Middle Bronze Age 2B, which is 18th century. All the fortifications around the spring are all dating from that period. So why not to connect and say that actually not only Melchizedek was a priest to the utmost God and so on, but also he was a great, great builder. You know, to take the biblical citation and to say, why not to join it? You see, it's a bit weak, but still it is very, very possible. You understand what I mean? And so the greatest fortifications of the spring are there. Then comes the project of what is called Warren Shaft also belongs to that time. But it was then meant not to lead to the spring. It was meant to lead into a big pool excavated in the rock. You'll see it when you'll have your tour of the city of David. And so actually that was it. But as is very typical to all the springs in the Judean mountains, where water is slowly, the amount of water is decreasing, people used to dig into the soil to go lower to release relieve the pressure on the water and so that more water will come out. You see it in all the springs if you go to Satar. Gibeon, the famous site which was excavated by Philadelphia, you can see exactly, they made a whole tunnel into the mountain in order to increase the amount of water. The same thing happened there, and in the 9th century, people had to do the same thing, and suddenly they dug the last part of Warren's shaft. So this was 9th century. What Ezekiel did, he took the part from Warren's shaft, which was meant by bucket to pull water from the spring. What Ezekiel did, he used the beginning of his great project. He took Warren's shaft first part, the lowest part, and from there he went on all the way to the pool of Siloam. The pool of Siloam was always the storage of water, because the spring of Gihon is a gushing spring. It doesn't flow all the time. It flows and it stops. It flows and it stops. So the pool of Siloam was a kind of a, how shall I say, kind of a place where water was always available to irrigate gardens and so on. So Ezekiel made advantage and brought the water there. The later story, you know, I can go on like that, what happened when Christianity became prevailing, because remember Jesus did one of his miracles there, so of course the thing changed.
What we would like you to do is, obviously, we have the first wall. Now, when you at Jaffa Gate, the second wall, was it Agrippa that built that?
I will speak about it tomorrow, but the point is that David's Tower is the point where the third wall starts coming, stemming out from the first wall. Yes, but
and
this
what
is
date
second
you give that,
period.
the 40s?
What?
Early 40s?
What, the third one?
Uh-huh.
Yes, it's Agrippa, who ruled from 41 to 44.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's very important, because when I take you to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, in 44, Golgotha is in the city. In 30, it's outside the city. You cannot imagine anybody after 40 or 44 saying that's Golgotha. So that's absolutely incredible. It's a slam dunk.
The wall in Jesus' time was the second wall.
That's right.
Which means when Jesus' life, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was outside of the city. By the way, I'm one of the great defenders of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Yes. And I want to tell you one thing. There is no dispute about it, because there are 6 burial caves from the time of Jesus in the precinct of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
I will show all those to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.